Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. I am a former journalist who wants to help tell amazing stories by asking questions. Everyone has a story to tell, and listening to someone speak their truth and their experience, I believe, is one of the most human things we can do. And more than ever, there's a general lack of willingness to go deep to understand why people think, act, and believe like they do, especially when there are differences of opinions. And my goal is to counter that by exposing the stories that deserve to be told so that we all might better empathize with the people, the human beings around us. And my hope is that along the way, this show provides you an example of what it means to listen more than you speak so that you can become a more thoughtful and informed person. So whether you're a journalist, a podcaster yourself, a blogger, someone who wants to learn how to be quick to listen and slow to speak, or someone who just likes to hear great stories, this is the show for you. And today on the show, I am so excited about this guest. Just really, really interesting and incredible work. Today on the show, I have Teresa Abram. She is a graphologist. And what a graphologist does is the study of human handwriting. It's the study of picking out your personality traits and characteristics and mindset just simply on your pen strokes, just simply based on your pen strokes. We get into everything from why does writing tell us so much? What you can understand and discern about someone's mood, someone's feelings, someone's attitude, how you can use that information for both positive and negative if you wanted to, but obviously the work that Teresa does is in the positive sense. What are the misconceptions? And how is handwriting one of the more non-discriminatory ways of getting a look into someone's character and thoughts and feelings and attitude? Like I said, fantastically interesting stuff here. And I am super excited because here in a few weeks, Teresa is going to invite me onto her show, A Most Unusual Tea Party. And I've sent her a handwriting sample and she's going to read my T. And we get into that. Why is the letter T in this instance so important? So buckle in, guys. This is a fantastic interview with a fantastic woman. Here it is, my interview with Teresa Abram. How does one become a graphologist? I can't imagine that you're sitting like some friends want to be police officers and some teachers, and then you're talking about deciphering handwriting. How does one get into your field of study?
Great question. And I do get asked that a lot because you're absolutely right. You don't sit in grade 4 and say, I'm going to be a graphologist. It doesn't happen. For me, this was always present in my life. My parents talked about it. It was something that was just part of growing up and learning handwriting. I had atrocious handwriting, and the number of times I had teachers say, great ideas, wonderful essay, your handwriting sucks, we're talking marks. And I think part of that was just because I also, know the flip side of it, right? It was looking at some of this stuff and saying, I don't want that to be in my writing. And so then I ended up with this mishmash of forms. But it also became very reflective of who I was. Mm-hmm. It gave me a bit of a freedom. So from that perspective, it's always been around. For now, actually moving into it as a career, it's really just my passion for it. It's based on a lifetime of learning, of reading books, taking online courses. Because in Canada, there's actually nothing offered to be an official, to get an official designation doesn't exist. So it is just based on passion and research and practice, and more practice.
I'm sensing a theme here.
Yeah, right.
Take me back to the conversations with your parents. How did those conversations come up? Why was handwriting and script so important to them?
Yeah. So way back when I was in school, many years ago, it was something that we spent a lot of time on. We did do the practicing over and over and over again. And when we moved into handwriting, I don't think my parents immediately started commenting, but I do remember in grade 6 when, my dad would just walk by and, I remember one time in particular, he'd walk by and he said, change your slant. When you slant it to the left like that, that means you're going to be self-centered. Slant it the other way. And so then I went to the extreme. I was like way over to the right, as far as I could possibly go. And then there would be other times where based on your baseline, depending on if it goes up or down, it's really reflective of your internal state of mind, whether you're feeling depressed or whether you're feeling happy. And so I know that there would be times where sometimes they take a look at that and say, hey, what's going on? Because they'd seen the baseline that it was going down. And so it was just part of this very fluid sort of environment that I was growing up in.
You mentioned your handwriting. You started to pick apart, like, I don't like this, or was that what you were saying? Like, you added in different elements based on what you saw. What did you not like about your own writing? You said you were terrible, but what did you not like about your writing?
Oh my, where to start with that one? I was a very fast writer. And a lot of times what you get told is that you have to slow down, be more legible. And so I didn't like that about my writing, that it was really very fast and I could read it, but others had problems with it. So I would try to slow down my writing. It took a long time for me just to embrace the fact that that's just the speed my brain goes at. And to get it out on paper, it's got to go fast. I know even when I'm talking, sometimes I get so excited and my words come rushing out and I forget words when I'm talking, and it happens on paper too. So that's definitely the big one where I would just try to slow it down, make it look better, and make it so that other people could read it.
How in the world does writing with a slant to the left mean self-centered? And how did your dad know that? Like, where did his background, where did your parents' background come from to be able to discern that?
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of different parts to that. Handwriting analysis, graphology, used to be a part of psychology. It was something that they recognize really is reflective of a person. And so you can almost hit the ground running. If you get a sample from somebody before you ever talk to them, you can get it, you hit the ground running of what might be a problem point. And my dad had taken university courses, and so he had some exposure through there. We also had a very liberal upbringing where there was a lot of very different ideas in the house. And that's, of course, based on both my parents' upbringing as well, right? They were not traditional upbringings for sure. I remember my grandma doing yoga in the 70s, and nobody else's grandma did yoga, just mine.
What else? Dive into that. What else do you mean by non-traditional? What does that mean?
Oh, sure. So by that, I mean, we definitely, like I say, my grandma did yoga before anybody else's grandma was doing yoga. That's definitely come about since then. We also had a lot of positive thinking. We did a lot of our thoughts become form, which at that time was really out there. This is way before the internet, and it just wasn't out there. You had to look really, really hard to find the resources that helped with that. And I didn't know anybody else in school who had that same kind of thought. They didn't have that same upbringing that your thoughts create your life. And if you watch those, you're going to see what happens in your life as well. I think that's probably the biggest non-traditional part of my upbringing.
Yeah. The awareness of it, for sure. You mentioned graphology was a part of psychology. Did you ever have an interest in psychology? Did that spur this, or where did that? Have you ever had an interest there?
I have. I did actually, and I had started to take psychology, and at the end of the day, I decided that part wasn't for me, and I decided to pursue a different path. And in some ways, I think it was almost rebellion against my upbringing. And I went into more traditional things like, I decided to become a legal assistant. And then I also became very active in home building and ended up being a general manager of a custom home building company. So I sort of went the opposite direction from all of that and became very concrete, so to speak.
Literally, if you're talking about building homes.
Right. Indeed.
Why does handwriting tell us so much then?
Yeah, great question. So handwriting, we think of it as just, pen on paper, but that pen is connected to our hand, and our hand is controlled by our brain. And it's impulses that are coming from our brain that allow us to do the writing. So while we learn the forms, we all start at the same place. We all start learning the same forms. we start adopting different forms that feel right for us. We might see somebody else write a letter a different way, and then we say, we're going to do that, and we try it out. And if it feels good, we stick with it. And if it doesn't, we drop it and we'll bring in our own. And it's all based on our brain, what feels right. And so our brain starts to take over those formations, and it just intuitively starts to change things. It's amazing how often you can see when somebody is lying. You can start to spot a lie in their handwriting, because for most people, lying isn't natural. So if you believe the lie, we're never going to see it. But if you feel a little bit of guilt about lying, the brain recognizes it and it reflects it in the handwriting. And there's little cues that you can look for to see that. So it is really just comes down to those impulses from your brain. You're more focused on the words, the spelling, putting it together, and your brain is taking care of all of the rest of it. And it's those impulses that we're reading more than the words themselves.
I'm sure it varies wildly from person to person, but how do you discern someone is lying in their handwriting? What are there certain tells? Is it the same across the board for everyone? What are you looking for, I guess, when you're looking for a lie in handwriting?
Yeah, there's quite a few different tells that you can spot, and it is different for everybody. And even the same person will have different tells depending on the type of lie that they're saying. Because, of course, there's different types of lies, right? There's lies by omission, and then there's just flat out factual lies, and there's all sorts of different ones. I think one of the most common tells is an extra large space that happens before the lie. So for most of us, we have very steady rhythm. There's going to be a similar spacing between words. Okay. And when we're thinking about a lie or getting ready to tell a lie, we sort of pause because we're thinking, how do I want to say this? Do I really want to say this? But the momentum of your hand carries on. And so it creates a little bit of a space. And then as you start the lie, you move your hand forward again. So it's just this extra long space is probably the most common tell for lying. What else is there? Another one would be, so part of graphology is we're looking for a baseline, right? When we look at somebody's overall handwriting, everybody's is totally different and very, very unique. So you look at that baseline, and once you establish your baseline, you're going to look for any deviation. So if usually it's really nice and legible, they have nice rounded letters, and suddenly you hit a word that isn't legible, you're going to look at that and say, does it make sense? Is this a spelling issue? Did they just not know how to spell the word? Or is this something deeper? Because as soon as you deviate from that baseline, that's a sign.
How long does it take to train your eye to see these things? Because you see like people on TV, they're like, oh my gosh, he glanced off to the side, he must be lying. And what I'm learning is that's a very, very long developed skill to actually be able to read somebody's body language and tell. And there's a baseline that you have to get in all that. How long does it take to discern these types of differences that you're seeing? I mean, how wide of a space are we talking when somebody starts a lie? Is it always against their baseline, I assume?
Yes, exactly. It's always going to be against their baseline. If you have somebody who has really squished writing, it's very close together with small spacing in between it, and suddenly you have a big space, you know that that's going to be your indication. It's harder to tell if they naturally have big spaces in between their words. It can be harder to spot that particular trait because they already have big spaces and big pauses, and you never know for sure, is that because it's a lie or not? So you're always judging it against the rest of their handwriting. And before you really pipe up and say, yes, that's a lie, I'm going to call you on it, you want to check for other signs. Right? There's the golden rule of 3, where you want to try to see, are there other indications here? And if you see 3 other indications towards it, then you're going to move forward and say it. Or the other thing is sometimes it just makes sense, right? Like if they don't know how to spell the word, there's a reason for why they've deviated. So you just got to always bring in a little bit of common sense and then look for a rule of 3.
Right. And I apologize. I asked 2 questions there. How long did it take you to kind of develop that eye for this?
That's a really tough one to answer. I think I think it's kind of like, it's almost like anything, right? Once you start looking, you're looking at the basics. To really get good at it, it just takes practice, and that can take a while. I would say for myself, taking it from just the basics and looking at it to say, okay, is this person happy? Are they sad? Are they sociable? Or are they, more kind of standalone people who would like to keep their distance from others? To sort of take it beyond the basics. It's probably taken me about 2 years of really looking at it, really analyzing it, and really breaking it down, every word by word by word, and then just checking in with people to see how'd I do. And of course, we can never be 100%. We can't tell everything about a person from their handwriting, but we can get pretty close. About 80% accuracy, I'd say, is what we average. And yeah, it takes a bit of time. And so much depends on just how much do you practice? How much do you do it? How much variety do you bring in?
Right. You mentioned, you can't get everything right about a person, but I was reading on your website actually that you made the statement or the idea that it's the most non-discriminatory way of analyzing someone. Can you dive into that? How so?
Absolutely. It's the most non-discriminatory because when I'm looking at a handwriting sample, I cannot tell the age for certain. There's certain handwriting that looks immature, but that does not mean that person is a young person. It just means that emotionally, they're not matured. I can't tell if they're older people because you can have younger people that have older looking handwriting. Again, it's because what is their emotional maturity, not their actual physical age. So I can't tell that. You can't make any deductions about a person's age. I cannot tell race. I cannot tell you whether this person is white, black, yellow, green, any color. I can't tell you whether they are English, German, Italian, Spanish. I can't tell you anything about ethnicity. Did I get that right?
Ethnicity. Right.
Right. So I can't tell anything about that. I also cannot make any deduction about whether or not it's a male or a female. There are certain characteristics that typically tend to be more female orientated and certain ones that are typically more male orientated. But it's not cut and dry. And so I would never be able to make that determination just from handwriting alone.
What are some of those distinctions between men and women in their handwriting?
So I think the most common one between men and women is usually if you see like a circle for an eye dot, that's usually a female thing. Or if they have a little heart, that's usually a female thing. But you can have males who do that as well. It's not 100%. For males, they tend to be a lot more, it's a stripped down writing that they will do. It's a simplification of forms, typically. That's really changing, though. I'm starting to see a lot more females that are doing the simplification of forms as well.
What about, let me go back to my college days and give you kind of an example here. I went into college initially as a civil engineering major. Terrible mistake, but I had to take a drafting class where they were very, very focused on print and penmanship and the blockiness of letters. And my handwriting completely changed after that. Do we still characterize or take in, I'm trying to think of how to ask this question that's in my mind. Do characteristics of our old handwriting blend with new in a situation where our handwriting kind of outright changes because of that level of intentionality? Does that question make sense?
I think so. If I'm understanding you, you're really asking is, can outside training influence our handwriting?
Yeah.
And does it change throughout our lives? Do we carry it forward with us?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You said it much more eloquently than I did.
Okay, thank you for that. That is a great question. So I'm going to break that into two parts. And the first part of that is when you take training like that, when you do the drafting, when you take training that is creating a stylized type of printing, that's not one that we can analyze. So for the drafts people who took that, we're never going to analyze that type because it's stylized. And we know that it's trained, it's ingrained. It's not going to tell me anything about you as an individual. It's the same as if people use calligraphy. We can't analyze that because that's a stylized type of writing. what I would ask for then is to say, okay, if you were writing a page in your journal or you were writing a shopping list, how would you write it?
Gotcha. Again, going back to that baseline, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we want the writing that you would do if it was for your eyes only. And then we can take a look at that. Now, does training affect it? Absolutely. But if you look at you as a person were not the same person at the end of that course as you were going into it.
Right.
So yes, it affects your handwriting and it affected you as a person. So it's going to evolve and change with you. You may keep pieces of it, just like some of that training may have stuck with you. There were parts of it that you said, I actually like this part and I'm going to keep doing it. Even though the whole thing isn't for me, there might be pieces that I keep. And that's really, as we move through life, that's exactly what we're doing, right? Yeah. We're saying, I like this or I don't, or this affects me positively and this affected me negatively. And then it shows up in our handwriting.
I want to go back to the lie, because that is so interesting to me that you can catch somebody in a lie in their writing. What's the biggest whopper you've ever caught somebody in? Are you able to share?
I don't think I really want to share. Actually, I'm going to be totally upfront with you here, Michael. I really suck at spotting handwriting lies. I'm going to be really upfront with you. It's one of those things where I tend to be very, very trusting of people. And so for me to try to spot the lies has been a real challenge. And in season 2 of my podcast, A Most Unusual Tea Party, I actually set it up so that my guests would include a lie in their handwriting so that I could get more practice in spotting a lie. Because the only way to really practice is to get that feedback. Am I right or am I not right?
Absolutely. Yeah, again, going back to your theme of practice.
Yeah, exactly. So it's practice, practice, practice. And I can honestly say I'm not the greatest at that yet. I am getting better. And the more that I'm doing it, it's getting more and more clear. So yeah. Some whoppers are just so obvious. I mean, if somebody says they're really excited about something and it's like, yeah, you're really not. It's like, yeah. I think those are the fun ones. Like okay, I will share one. Just receiving a thank you card saying, thanks, it was a great time. Can't wait to do it again. And essentially the whole thing was going downhill. And there was this big pause between, where did she put the pause? Can't wait to do it again. She put a pause. There was a big giant space in between wait and again, I think. Can't wait to do it again or something like that. There was this giant, I thought, I don't think she had as much fun as she was telling me. I think that's not going to happen.
I'll make note of that when I send you a thank you note.
Yeah, right. Well, it's really funny because once people find out what you do, they're often really hesitant to actually send you anything handwriting.
Sure, I bet.
Yeah. It's like suddenly everything is text and emails.
That's super interesting to me. How has technology and the explosion of technology changed your job?
Mm-hmm. So with the explosion of technology, it's changed it because people have this perception that handwriting is no longer important. They say, well, no, we have all of this other stuff. We don't need handwriting. It's irrelevant. And it isn't. We're always going to be making notes to ourselves. We're always going to have a shopping list. There's no way that you can completely eliminate all handwriting. So I think part of it is just that perception that nobody handwrites anymore and we don't need it. So I think that's how it's impacted it a little bit. The other part of it, though, which is really a positive, is because people are not practicing handwriting as much as they used to. It's not drilled into them over and over again. Is their handwriting has become really, really reflective of who they are. So it's way more communicative than it used to be. Like I think back to when my mom, her handwriting was perfect and you compared it to her sister or her brothers and it was all very, very much the same because when they were in school, that was really, really drilled into them. Of course, at that time with society, how you behaved and how you acted was very structured and there was really strict rules of what you did and did not do. And their handwriting reflected that. So, I think that now our handwriting is way more original, way more unique, way more reflective of truly who that person is on the other end of the pen.
Very interesting. you mentioned your podcast, A Most Unusual Tea Party, and the significance there is it's the letter T, not the drink tea.
Bingo.
For the listeners, what is it about the letter T? What stands out about that particular letter that tells us so much?
Oh, yeah. So the letter T is the most talkative letter in the entire alphabet. There are over 450 different ways that you can write that T. And the real power behind it is the fact that you have a vertical stroke when you make the stem, and then you have a horizontal stroke when you make the bar. And typically, the way that we're trained to do it is that you're going to lift the pen off the paper to create that vertical stroke. So you have both the up and the down and the side to side. And when you have both up and down motion and side to side, it's so talkative and so communicative, and just the different combinations that you can get really gives me a solid picture of a person.
So if I was just writing my letter T here as you were saying that, and I connect the two.
Oh.
I draw a line down for the vertical and then up to the left and across for the horizontal. What does that? Okay. What does that tell you?
So yeah, right. It's. I'd have to see a larger sample of them, but usually when you connect it like that, it's a sign of persistence.
Oh.
So when you keep it connected, it shows that you're persistent and you're going to continue and see a project through until the very end. You're not going to pull your energy away from it.
Hopefully you're not just being nice to me, because I could have gone off in a totally different dark direction if you were going to tell me like, it means you're a mass murderer.
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I think that's always the number one fear people have, is that I'm going to say something horrible about them. And I really don't feel that that's the role of graphology. It's not to make you feel terrible about yourself. It's about understanding yourself, and it's about going deeper and just seeing who you are. So whenever I'm dealing with somebody, whatever handwriting I see, I'm going to try to look at it from the lens of, this is a human being on the other side, and where's the positive? Because everything has a positive, right? You can always see a positive. There are some definite red flags, but even how you phrase it, you can still be soft with it and say, hey, have you ever considered this?
Yeah. What are the applications as you're looking into somebody and deciphering how they write in their script? What are the applications that you find yourself most called into?
Sure. So I think a really big one right now is just self-discovery. People who are looking to understand more about themselves, they want to know more. And handwriting is so reflective of who we are. So if you give me a handwriting sample this week and you give me one next week and we carry it on for a few weeks, we're going to get a really good sampling of who you are and what your default is. Right? Because everybody has good days and they have bad days. So if we have a continuum of samples to choose from, we can really start to tell where's your default. And based on those samples, we can start to say, maybe try improving this, or maybe try changing this. Based on what we see in the handwriting, we can make suggestions to help them improve their lives. So certainly self-discovery, self-improvement is a big one when it comes to handwriting analysis and its applications. Another one is relationships. It's a good thing you can take a look at it to say, this is my handwriting. This is somebody else's handwriting. Are there going to be problems? And you can take a look to see, where might there be a friction point? Because that's a good thing to know. And a lot of the times, just as long as you're aware of it, then you can make that conscious decision of, I can live with that or I can't.
So in essence, I guess you're kind of describing graphology then as a way, a means of therapy. Would it be fair to characterize it that way?
So
I'm guessing no by that answer.
Yeah, we get into some scary territory there because it's not therapy. Now, you can do graphotherapy, right? So graphotherapy is a very unique application of graphology where you do certain exercises and you listen to certain music and you do certain things with the intent to change. So that is an application. In the broader spectrum of things, like I would never say it's going to be do this instead of counseling or therapy. Worked in conjunction with that, it's amazing. Because you can see through people's lies. like when I think of it in that context, it's very easy. If somebody is telling me, yes, I'm really feeling positive today and it was a great week, I mean, I could spot that easily. In handwriting, if in fact it wasn't a great week, it shows up so clear. So you can instantly know that, nope, I'm not going to take that at face value, and you back it up. So certainly in therapy, it works great in conjunction with it, but it does not replace counseling or therapy with a professional.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. How does a bad mood or a bad experience affect handwriting? Do we get slower? Do we get faster? I guess, yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth. How does that type of a lie that you just described affect our writing?
So there's a couple of different ways that it's going to show. A big one is going to be that your letters will get narrower and more condensed. So if you typically have wider, rounder letters, they're going to get narrower and more condensed. You're also going to start going on a downhill. Okay, so rather than having your baseline either even or going up, it's going to slope down. And that's usually your biggest indicator right there. And it's amazing how often that happens. It still amazes me even when I'll just be writing something out and I'll look at it and I'll be like, oh, wait a moment. Look what I just did there. Okay, how can I change this so that I'm not feeling that way about something? So those are the two biggest ones to watch. But I would, again, there's so many different things that you're looking for because there can be a lot of reasons for that happening. Maybe they have the page on an angle on their desk, or there's so many other things that can be going on that you would never want to jump to that conclusion without being able to look at the rest of it.
Yeah.
Solid understanding, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking as you were saying that, how do you account for like, hey, my hand's tired, like it's harder to write the words. Do you have to account for that too?
So on a typical sample, if somebody tells me that, or they'll say my hand's tired or my hand slipped, no, I'm not going to buy into that because typical samples are not very long.
Gotcha.
Right? You might have a page of writing. And not a solid page, right? It's, you set your margins and you set your line spacing, and you usually are in control of how much you're going to write. So to say my hand's tired or the pen slipped, I'm not going to buy it. Really not. Now, if we're looking at 10 pages of writing, by the end of it, I'll give you some leeway there.
Gotcha.
I could agree with you on that, but not for a typical sample, no.
Okay, very good. What are the business applications of this? How are you ever approached by businesses to? Yeah, what are the business applications? I'll leave the question there.
Yeah, sure. So definitely it has a business application. One of them is for employee screening. So if you're hiring people, it's a great way. And again, it's non-discriminatory. If you have people do a handwriting sample, it's amazing how much we can discover about them. So if you want somebody who is very open and very sociable, like for a sales position, that handwriting is very distinctive and very different from somebody who's going to be quieter and more reserved. And they might be better for something like accounting or that type of situation, right? So we can certainly tell characteristics of a person in their handwriting that make them ideal for a job or not. So if you're hiring people, it's a great way to say, are they really who they say they are? Right? It's because people often have blinders on themselves. So you can do personality testing and all the rest of it, but ultimately it still comes down to, is that person being honest and do they have any blinders on? Whereas handwriting strips that off. The other way of using it in a business is when you do your yearly reviews of employees. It's a great way to check to see how they're doing, especially right now during COVID. When everybody is isolated, you can put a mask on, you can appear upbeat in front of a camera on your Zoom call, but what happens after you turn that Zoom call off? How is that employee actually doing? Getting a handwriting sample can help you determine how are they really doing. Right? It's going to show, are they enjoying this working from home or is this really hard on them? So doing reviews of employees just to check and see how are they doing mentally, and also to see, are they actually happy in the job that they're doing or are they starting to look unhappy?
Interesting. Mm-hmm. What about misconceptions? What do people think about handwriting that you found to not actually be true?
Oh, hands down. Biggest one would be that messy writing is bad. Hands down, that is the biggest misconception. Just because you have messy handwriting, it does not make you a bad person. And just because you have picture perfect, nice writing does not make you a good person. So it has nothing to do with that. It is about individual strokes. It is about the overall use of space on a page. It's about how you break your zones. Do you have your upper zone? Do you have the middle zone? Do you have the lower zone? Are any of those stunted? Are any of those missed entirely? So it's not about messiness. It's not about making it look like textbook perfect. And in fact, if we have textbook perfect with, ruler straight, it's a warning sign that this person is really keeping a tight lid on things and might explode.
I guess that makes sense hearing that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think definitely, number one, that is the biggest misconception out there about handwriting, for sure.
What other ones come to mind? Yeah.
Yeah. The other one would be that it can only be done with cursive, that you have to do cursive handwriting in order to get a sample. You don't. You can do printing, and that is just fine. Whatever is most natural to you, we can work with. It used to be, and I think that in some ways, the field of graphology kind of shot itself in the foot when we became sticklers to say that it can only be cursive handwriting. We have to have a cursive sample. We really don't. If somebody wants to do printing and that's what's natural to them, we can use that. We can work with it. Because the very choice to use printing rather than cursive tells us something. And that's where we start. We know that it's printing. We know where we're starting from. It still tells us information. It just doesn't necessarily tell us as much information as if we can have a cursive sample. So we can still work with printing. It's not a problem at all.
You mentioned right there messiness versus nice print, quote unquote nice print. Are you saying that we have a bias in our perception of handwriting?
Yes. Now who's being the eloquent one? Yeah, that was very well put, Michael. That's exactly what I'm saying, is that we do have a bias. And I think part of that is because a lot of us have suffered from, that red pen ink trauma where we get stuff back from teachers and it's covered in red pen. So we do have that bias that neat, pretty handwriting is better than anything else. And it's not. It's just different. Just like humans, there is no right or wrong. It's just we're different and your handwriting is different. That's all.
Yeah. You said you didn't do any favors by talking so much about cursive. I'm interested if do true crime shows do this field any favors in are what we see on the true crime shows where they decipher like this person definitely wrote this letter or this person's handwriting matches the perpetrator. Is that accurate? Are we seeing an accurate representation of the world of graphology and the work that you do?
Right. Great question. So it's a little bit more complicated than that because sometimes it's not graphology, right? It's not actually graphology that's being used. It's actually statement analysis that's being used. So they're looking at the words themselves and putting it into context to say, is that in conjunction with what this person would say? Sometimes graphology is used, but that tends to be more like the question documents end of it. And that's a little bit different of a field because question documents is a lot more of measurements. It's a lot more collecting of samples. And in that regard, what you see is certainly true, but it's a little bit different than graphology as a study, if that makes any sense.
If would I be correct then in characterizing it as often what we see on true crime shows is they're trying to match samples and not necessarily tell the behavior of someone?
Right.
Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So when you're doing that matching of samples, that's question document examination.
Okay.
And so it's a different study because then you're looking for different things. right? Like if you have a person who writes their signature 20 times, there are certain things that are naturally going to happen when it's your own signature. It's never going to look the same. You're going to start kind of going on your left-hand margin is going to increase, and you're going to get a lot more thready. It's going to become less and less clear for the person whose natural signature it is. If you're looking at a forgery and you ask the forger to write that same signature 20 times, your margin's going to be a little straighter. There's going to be a lot more similarity in each signature moving down the line. You're going to lose that spontaneity that automatically happens when it's your own signature. They're also usually going to stay at the same speed. Whereas for a person, you tend to speed up. By your 15th one, you're tired of doing this and you're going to be speeding that signature up.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever had to sign a whole whack of checks.
No, if you've ever like bought a house and had to sign all those documents.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. I know when I was a general manager of a home building company, and it's like my signature became really straightforward.
Yeah.
Because you get tired of it. Whereas a forger is going to go through and he's going to be much more careful every time. So they're really looking for something different so that they can just match them to say, yes, this is natural. No, this isn't.
Very good. Mm-hmm. Your podcast, what kind of issues or topics are you diving into on A Most Unusual Tea Party? What if somebody jumps into your show, what can they expect?
Thank you. Great question. So with the Most Unusual Tea Party, it's really just something for me to talk to people who I find fascinating and interesting. The first part of the tea party, we're going to look at their handwriting, and I'm going to take a look and see what does their tea tell me. And again, it's the letter T, not what they're actually drinking in their tea cup. So we take a look at that and just see. And I try to keep it to a point where I don't actually know my guests. Now, most podcasters like yourself, Michael, you do a lot of research on your guests before they come on your show. And for me, I actually don't do that. I try to avoid any kind of research outside of what I know from them until I've done their handwriting sample and done that analysis, because I want it to try to be as genuine as possible. I think the biggest thing that as a graphologist you have to try to overcome is any sort of confirmation bias, where you don't look at the sample and see what you want to see. You need to see what really is there. And so if I don't really know my guests very well, it's easier for me to look at it in an unbiased way. So I'm learning about my guests as much as my listeners are. And it's kind of fun living on the edge a little bit, because who knows if I'm going to be right or wrong. And the lie part is really fun in season 2, where I do spot the lie, because honestly, it is such a hit and miss. You just never know if I'm going to get it right or not. So it's a lot of fun. At the end of, I also provide a platform for my guests just to talk about themselves, share their story, share what they do. And a big part of it is about helping people understand that everybody is different. And those differences make us unique for something. There's something that we are going to be amazing at if we embrace that difference. So just because you're not good at one thing doesn't mean you're never going to be good at anything else. There's going to be a spot for you. And that's really at the heart of the tea party, what I want it to be about. It's about honoring our individuality, our successes, and actually even our failures, because they tell us something too.
Well, you're speaking to me there, because I'm doing that with questions. You're doing it with reading people's tea and handwriting. I love that. I love that is the underlying driver of this. Teresa, to kind of loop it back to the beginning, I mean, you talked about getting into graphology and why that was interesting to you, but where did this drive to want to understand people's story come from? Because I think that we haven't gotten there yet, but I'd love to know, why do you want to read people's tea?
Well, I am always fascinated, and I always have been fascinated by what makes people tick. I know when I was growing up, and the books that I took out of the library for light reading were biographies. I was reading about Catherine the Great. I was reading about Adolf Hitler. I was reading about anybody who caught my attention. I was pulling those books and reading biographies. I wasn't reading the fiction. So I think I've always wanted to understand, what is it that makes people tick? And as I moved into different jobs in my life, sometimes I was able to fulfill that and some I wasn't. When I started doing custom home building, that was part of it, right? It's like, how do we make this house fit your life? Because you're unique and you're individual. And so that's the company that I worked with. That's what we did. It's like, how do we adjust this house to make it so it's perfect for you and your life? So that was a big element of it. Once I left that, I got into wellness coaching, which of course is all about what makes you tick and how can we put that to advantage and make it work for you so that you can live your best life possible. So I think that's just something in me that I'm always curious about the human being. I love like Desmond Morris, who was who was a zoologist who studied the human being. And he was kind of at the forefront of that body language movement of how do we, we all have a way of communicating that's nonverbal. And I just have always been fascinated by that kind of thing.
Very cool. Well, Teresa, this has been enlightening. I love it. I'm so interested in this. And I think it's super, super cool what you're doing. How can people connect, follow along? Obviously, we talked about your podcast. I'm assuming it's on all the podcast channels and wherever people can find them. But how can people connect with you and follow along with your work?
Yeah, for sure. So yes, the podcast is on all the usual ones. You can follow it on Google Podcasts, on Stitcher, on Apple Podcasts, on iHeartRadio. You can also go to my website, which is just handwritingpi.ca. And on there will be a tab as well for podcasts, and you can click on it there. They can also follow me on Instagram, which is handwriting_pi for Instagram. And that's my main way of communicating with people is through Instagram.
Very good. Last question for you here before I let you go on this Friday. What's a question that you don't think people ask enough when it comes to the work that you do? Or what's a question that you wish you were asked more?
That I wish I was asked more?
Yeah.
I think, for that question, Michael, I think I'm actually going to say there's one that I really wish people would stop asking.
That works too.
Okay. And from there, I think I could probably get to the question I'd rather that they ask. But I find that in our society right now, and this maybe comes back to the technology part where we have so much technology that it's almost overwhelming for people. And we're getting really used to having somebody else curate our information for us. And so the question that people ask me all the time is like, well, give me the data. Before I try this, give me the data on it. Give me the studies. And to me, it's sort of like, well, don't take my word for it. Either try it for yourself and form your own opinion, or do your research so that you know it's unbiased. I'm a big believer that we need to take responsibility for our own knowledge, our own learning, and we need to step up to the plate. And I think we're getting really complacent with allowing other people to do that research and to do that curating for us. So I guess the question that I would like for people to say would be more like, how can I learn to do this? Where can I get more information? Ask me the where that you can go and find it. I think that would be awesome.
That's beautiful. I'm breathing a sigh of relief because it wasn't a question that I asked you that you didn't want to be asked. So
yeah, no, you're in the clear.
Well, yeah. Let's end it there. When you were teaching yourself, where did you turn to? What are some resources that you could give people who are interested, other than your website and the work that you do? Where can people go to begin to educate themselves on this?
Yeah. So a really great resource is Reed Hayes, and he has a book called Between the Lines. It is a fantastic resource for learning how to do it. Sheila Lowe is also another amazing resource. She's been doing graphology for 50 years and just has tons of amazing good books. She has good courses that you can take and give you a good introduction. And if you want to take it further, it allows you to dive deeper into it as well. So I would definitely recommend either of those two people to start your journey into what more. And if you want to get a little more because there is a side of graphology that can get a little bit sensationalist. Okay. I think Edgar Allan Poe kind of started it because he did a book where he took handwriting samples of people who were prominent in the time. And then he said, I'm going to use their handwriting and we'll learn a little bit about them. And he said, it's also a means to gossip. And that's kind of stuck with graphology sometimes. So there are some that are a little more scintillating. And if you want to learn more about that, then I would recommend Andrea McNeil. She's got a good book that does have some good stuff, and it's also more on the sensationalist side of things.
Do you find yourself just constantly analyzing people's handwriting, or can you pull yourself out of it?
Oh, no. Any sample that I come across, I'm always looking at it to see what's unusual, what's different about this. And then always followed up by, what am I assuming about it? Right? That's always such a big question to ask, is what do I see and what am I assuming?
Love the self-awareness there, Teresa. That's fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been super interesting, like I said, and I appreciate your time and super interesting work that you're doing. Keep it up. You're doing really interesting stuff there, Teresa.
Super. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun, Michael.
So many thanks to Teresa for her time and insight and just experience on the show today. Please do me and Teresa a huge favor and share this episode with someone you know who might also find some value or might find today's conversation interesting. Share this episode with your network, help spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. And if you have it in your heart, please leave a rating and review of this show wherever you might be listening. And if you know someone who you think would be a great guest on the follow-up question or have a question you'd like me to address on a future episode, email me at michael@thefollowupquestion.com or go to thefollowupquestion.com/contact and submit a guest recommendation there. If you want to improve your own ability to listen and ask questions, hop over to thefollowupquestion.com/newsletter and subscribe. And when you do, I'll send you my free guide, the 10 follow-up questions guaranteed to keep a conversation going. You'll also be the first to know about new content and fresh tips and tricks, and that's all free when you subscribe at thefollowupquestion.com/newsletter. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question, and until then, keep asking questions.